The book of Revelation is filled with all kinds of cataclysmic and amazing events. But do these events already happen at some point in the past and been documented? Or are these events yet to happen in some ambiguous future? And should we even take these events to be literal, or are they just symbols and code for something else? We'll talk about that on this week's episode of Revelation Revealed on Faith by Reason. Welcome to Faith by Reason, and this is week 2 of our series called Revelation Revealed, a verse-by-verse study of the enigmatic and very rewarding book of Revelation. And this is the second part of the introduction to Revelation. There will be 3 introductory episodes before we actually get into the meat of the verse-by-verse study. The reason being that Revelation is such a complex and rich and deep book with so many different interpretations and so many different ways you can go, that I really want to make sure that we get a really solid introduction to what's going on and how to view this book before I get into the verse-by-verse teaching. And in the previous episode, we looked at the book of Revelation from the divine perspective. How does God see it? How does Jesus see the book of Revelation? How should we view it through the divine eyes? And we saw that the book of Revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him. That the book of Revelation is actually a conversation between the Father and the Son, between the first 2 members of the Godhead. And we have the opportunity, the privilege through the Apostle John to eavesdrop on this conversation between the Father and the Son. So that's the divine perspective of Revelation. But we are not divine. We are humans, and we have a human perspective on Revelation. And that's what we will be talking about. We will be talking about the various human views of the book of Revelation. And because they are our human views, they are not without their flaws, but they are the way that we human beings interpret this mysterious, enigmatic, and powerful book. There are 3 basic interpretive philosophies that we're going to look at. No, there are more than 3. There are hundreds, thousands. I mean, people have all kinds of views about the book of Revelation. But generally speaking, there are 3 primary categories that most people who commentate, who teach, and who study the book of Revelation fall into. And those 3 areas are the allegorical point of view, then there is the historist or preterist point of view, and there is a futurist point of view. And we're going to look at all 3 of those. We're going to look at what they are, why the people who believe them that way, who the people who believe them are, and what the flaws are in each one of these philosophies, because again, they're human philosophies, so they all have their flaws. And then I will let you know which one of these categories that we will be using on Faith by Reason as I teach the verse-by-verse study of Revelation. So let's get started with the first viewpoint, the first interpretative philosophy, and that is the allegorical point of view. And as the name would imply, the allegorical point of view, it basically states that Revelation should be seen in an allegorical sense, not in a literal sense. People who hold the allegorical view do not take the book of Revelation literally. They believe that the events, especially the supernatural events in the book of Revelation, are symbolic, that they're not real. They're in a bit of a code, for lack of a better word. So they're not literally demon locusts like in Revelation chapter 8 and 9. There aren't a literal 4 horsemen of the apocalypse galloping off and causing all the mayhem that they cause. There aren't going to be literal rivers and seas that turn into blood and poison people that way. There won't be literal 100-pound hailstones raining down upon people. And there won't be the literal death of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people when it talks about the fourth of the population of the earth being killed here and a third of them being killed there. And those things are not literal. They are symbolic. They should not be taken as real. Why do they believe this? Well, the people who take this allegorical point of view believe that the Apostle John was writing not a book about events that are actually happening or actually are going to happen, but that what John was writing was really a big picture treatise on good versus evil, the eternal battle of the good versus evil, and the ultimate triumph of the good. So John, they believe, was using symbolic language to really represent this eternal battle of the good guys, God and his holy angels, against the bad guys, the devil, and his unholy angels or his fallen angels and demons. So why would the Apostle John feel the need to write this kind of book? Well, the people who believe this look at John as a patriot above all else. John was a Jew. He was an Israelite, however you want to say it, during the first century. And in the first century, Israel was under the dominion of the Roman Empire. And the Jews did not like being under the Roman Empire. They longed to throw the yoke of Rome off of them and to set up a kingdom with their Messiah. They were, again, they were very, very unruly, and they didn't like the rule of Rome. So even though in a very general sense, the book of Revelation is a treatise of good versus evil, the specific evil that John was writing about was the Roman Empire. So when he was talking about the Antichrist, he really means the Roman emperor at the time. When he's talking about these demonic armies, he means the Roman armies, and the rivers of blood and things like that are the actual blood of the people who the Romans were, killing in order to do their conquest. So Rome was the specific evil he was talking about in this grand treatise of good versus evil. Again, why would that have to be symbolic? Well, because the Roman Empire didn't really like people talking bad about them, as no empire probably would. So when John is writing to these seven churches, and that's what the book of Revelation is written to denotatively, and we'll talk about that a few episodes from now, he wanted to make sure that they got the message. The problem is that the message would because John was actually in exile on the Isle of Patmos. We'll talk about that in a couple episodes. For being a Christian, for speaking out against, for speaking in favor of a religion, or what they called a religion, or a belief system that was counter to the Roman paganism. He was in prison, or actually exiled on Patmos, and he wrote these letters, and he wanted to give them to the seven churches. The problem is that because he was a prisoner, anything he wrote and sent out would be inspected by Roman officials before it got to where it needed to go. And if the Roman officials saw him writing blatantly of anti-Roman propaganda, as they would see it, calling the Roman Empire evil in very direct terms, it would never have gotten to the seven churches. It would have been destroyed as seditious language and seditious documents. John didn't want that. So he wrote it in a code, a symbolic code, that would not really resonate with the Roman inspectors who saw it. They would just see this, oh, okay, this is just this Christian guy talking about his crazy religion. Okay, that's fine. You can let the paperwork go, and it can go to the seven churches. So he had no choice but to write it in code. And that's the reason that all this stuff is symbolic and not real. He is talking about the Roman Empire, and everything bad about them is in this symbolic language in Revelation. So horsemen and hail and rivers of blood and swords and boils and the final judgment. For example, Babylon in Revelation chapter 17 and 18 is about the fall of Babylon. Well, they believe that Babylon was actually a symbolic or code for Rome, because Babylon is depicted in Revelation as this economic and religious power that would eventually be taken down and destroyed. And again, that's a symbol for Rome, which was the economic and religious power at the time, and that would be taken down, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what he was doing. So who believes the allegorical point of view? Who holds this point of view? Well, one group of people that hold the point of view are secular historians. They're probably the main ones. They're secular, so they don't believe in the supernatural. They don't believe in all these literal supernatural things happening. So they are the ones who posit the idea that it's a symbolic book written by a revolutionary, a patriot against a Jewish patriot against Rome, and that's how they feel. And if you look at other areas of secular history, like for example the History Channel, every year around the end of the year, between Christmas and New Year's, when the History Channel rolls out all of their shows about the apocalyptic stuff, end time stuff, and things like that. At least I think they do. I haven't had the History Channel in a while. I no longer have cable. My wife and I, we cut the cord, so to speak, when we moved into our house a few years ago. We just didn't feel like paying $200 a month for a bunch of channels we didn't watch. So, but when I did have the History Channel, and they still had history on it, as far as I could tell towards the end of my watching that channel, was very little history. It was mostly things like ice road truckers and crab fishermen and duck hunters, and also and aliens, always ancient alien stuff that was on there all the time. But anyway, the point is, when I was watching it, they would always have their end times apocalyptic stuff that week between Easter and New Year. Christmas and New Year's, the last week of the year. and they would inevitably the book of Revelation would come up, and their experts would always say that the whole thing, well, John the Apostle was just this revolutionary, this patriot writing about the Roman Empire, blah, 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 everything I just presented. So they believe it. Another group of people who believe this allegorical point of view is the kind of the progressive or liberal side of Christianity. People like the emergent church, they're very liberal, very progressive folk. And the reason they believe it is not the same as the secular historians. The reason that the emergents and the progressives, the liberals believe the allegorical point of view is because the depiction of God in Revelation does not match with their definition of their God of this ambiguous love. Not real love, not biblical love. They have the wrong definition of love. The real definition of love, which we've talked about previously on faithbyreason.net, the true definition, I mean, you can look at it in the categories. You go to faithbyreason.net, go to the categories and click on the love category, and you can see what I've written and done podcasts about on love. The real biblical definition of love is around sacrifice. It's about giving without the expectation of getting anything in return. That is a true biblical definition of love. It has nothing to do with feelings or emotions or anything like that. But that is not the definition that the liberal emergent church has of love. Their definition of love, again, it's ambiguous. It's just about feelings. It's about emotion. Love is a benevolent feeling towards someone. Being nice to someone is love to them. And so they've taken their definition of love, their non-biblical definition, and superimposed it on God, making the God of the Bible a God of their ambiguous kind of milquetoast, wishy-washy love. And since they do that, that does not jibe with the God in Revelation who is judging people. He's bringing about cataclysmic judgment. You have the 7 bowls of wrath where horrible things happen, where all the water in the world is turned to blood. And you have, again, the 100-pound hailstones raining down on people, and these swords and boils coming upon them, and trees and grass being burnt up, and millions, if not billions of people being killed in judgment. Well, that doesn't sound very nice, does it? No, that's not something a nice, quote unquote, loving God would do. If God was really a God of emotional, feelings-based love. It's not nice. And if love is being nice, well, killing a bunch of people with rivers of blood and hailstones is not nice. Therefore, they conclude that, well, this can't be our God. This can't really be describing God. So it has to be allegory. God would never do that. Our loving, sweet, gentle marshmallow of a God would never do all these really bad, nasty things we see in the book of Revelation. Therefore, it must be allegory. So that's why they believe it, because they make a huge, huge mistake, a prideful religious mistake, wherein they, instead of having their doctrine conform to the Bible, they want the Bible to conform to their doctrine. And it's always a sign of bad doctrine when you have to twist the Bible to fit into your doctrinal bubble. That is a sign of pride. The Bible should supersede your doctrine. If there's a conflict between your doctrine and the Bible should win. If you are humble, if you're a contrastive thinker. On the other hand, if you're a comparative thinker, if you're prideful, you believe that your doctrine is better than the Bible, and then you want to make the Bible fit your doctrine. And their doctrine of love is not biblical. Therefore, because they believe in their doctrine more than they believe in the Bible, the emergents want to change the Bible into something that fits their doctrine of this God of ridiculous, ambiguous, marshmallow love. So they say, well, the revelation can't be real. It can't be real. It has to be symbolic, because our loving God that we believe in, that we want to twist the Bible into, wouldn't do those sorts of things. So that's why the emergents believe in it. And the last group, and the biggest group of people who believe in the allegorical point of view, or at least tacitly believe in it, is the mainstream Christians. The mainstream church takes an allegorical point of view, not directly the way the secularists and the emergents do. No, they just don't teach Revelation. The average mainstream church stays as far away from Revelation as it possibly can. They never teach it. If you go to a mainstream church, ask yourself, when was the last time you heard Revelation preached? Not just the first 3 chapters. I mean, the hardcore stuff, chapters 6 through 19. You probably haven't. And if you ignore something, then you're pretending it doesn't exist. And if you pretend it doesn't exist, then it's technically an allegory. So the mainstream church, a Christian church in America, in the West, takes the allegorical point of view. What are the problems with the allegorical point of view? Well, there are a few. The main problem that I'll just focus on is the fact that if the allegorical point of view is true, then it renders Revelation meaningless. It's just a bunch of symbols. It's just a bunch of code words about this ambiguous war between good and evil that good will eventually triumph over. Okay, great. Big deal. How does that affect my life? It doesn't. It renders Revelation meaningless, especially if it's just a treatise on good and evil with the focus on the Roman Empire that hasn't existed for almost 2,000 years. How does it impact my life today if John the Apostle is writing about his problems with the Roman Empire in the first century when that doesn't affect, there is no Roman Empire? I mean, unless you count the Catholic Church, which we'll get into down the road a bit. But the point is, it's meaningless to me today if that's all it is an allegory about the Roman Empire. Whoopee. And lastly, the reason it makes it meaningless is because if it's written in this code, there's no decoder. John never gave us his decoder ring. We don't really know what his code means. I mean, we can guess, like I said, about the Antichrist being the Roman emperor, I guess, but the code is never defined. So if you write something in code and you don't define what the code is for your readers, then your code is meaningless. So that's really the big problem with the allegorical point of view. It makes Revelation meaningless. Right, let's move on to, and obviously, as you can probably guess, I do not hold the allegorical point of view. All right, moving on to the historist or preterist point of view. The essential premise of the preterist or historist point of view is that most of Revelation is history. Everything in Revelation from Revelation chapter 1 up to Revelation chapter 19, the second coming of Jesus, it's already happened. It's happened in the past. In fact, it happened in the first century AD. It already happened. It's done. Revelation 1 through 19, everything in there is history for those of us living today. And so we really need not concern ourselves with it from a practical standpoint. So why do they believe this? The preterists take their cue, or they build pretty much their entire philosophy on one verse, which is the problem, by the way, in a philosophical sense. But that one verse is at the end of of Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus says, and I'll paraphrase and I have the exact quote on the screen. He says that there are those of you who are standing here today who will not taste death, who will not see death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. You will not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The interpretation that preterists have of this is that Jesus, if this is true, then Jesus must have appeared during the lifetime of the people he was talking to. Thank you for watching this preview content. The full episode is exclusively available to Faith by Reason members. So to see this entire episode, as well as previous and upcoming episodes, and get incredible bonus content, question and answer sessions, live Bible studies, and more, join us on Patreon or subscribe on our website. Visit patreon.com/faithbyreason or faithbyreason.net to continue this journey through Scripture. Don't miss out. Subscribe today and explore the amazing mysteries of the Bible.